I let my dad and his new wife stay in my house because they were struggling financially, but just a month later, his wife sat me down and asked for monthly rent. My life has never been easy, not since the day I was born. You see, my mom passed away giving birth to me at the hospital. After that, I was raised by my dad, who somehow held me responsible. Yes, a literal baby for the death of his wife. There wasn't a single day in my childhood when my dad didn't remind me, in his own harsh way, that my existence was the reason my mom was no longer here. He would repeatedly tell me that my birth had taken the woman he loved most from him and that, deep down, he never really wanted me around. He'd say that because I came into the world at such a steep cost, I had an obligation to work harder than anyone else, to make sure my mom's death wasn't all for nothing. Imagine being a child and hearing words like that. It broke me. I was far too young to understand the complexities of grief, loss, or even anger. I needed my mom too, but she was gone, and the one parent I'd left, my dad, made me feel like I was the problem. He was supposed to be my protector, my guide, the one who showed me love and comfort. Instead, he was the one who constantly made me feel that my very existence was a curse. Growing up in that environment felt impossible. There were times when I honestly felt guilty just for breathing, like I didn't even deserve to exist. I wanted to talk to him, to explain how much his words hurt and how they made me feel like a stranger in my own home. But fear held me back. Every time I tried, I only faced more anger and bitterness. This resulted in a childhood marked by intense loneliness and isolation. While other kids had parents who encouraged them, who comforted them when they were down and made them feel safe, I was always walking on eggshells. I was constantly trying not to trigger more of my dad's resentment towards me. It wasn't just the lack of love, it was the anger and blame that he directed at something I couldn't change. The simple fact that I was alive. Despite everything, I tried to understand his pain. I knew losing my mom had shattered him in ways I couldn't even grasp, and that he never fully healed from that loss. But even understanding that didn't make it any easier to deal with the weight of his words. I was just a kid, trying to carve out a place for myself in a world that seemed so cold and unwelcoming. But still, deep down, I desperately longed for his approval, for his love, for him to at least acknowledge me as something other than a burden. I always hoped that somehow, despite all the hurt, I could make him proud. I remember how excited I'd get every time I brought home a report card with good grades. Thinking that maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different, I'd go to him, bubbling with excitement, eager to show him what I'd accomplished, hoping for even the smallest sign that I was enough in his eyes. But each time it was the same. He'd barely glance at my grades, grunt, and then tell me to work harder because it still wasn't enough. He'd remind me that hundreds of other kids could get the same grades, so it wasn't a big deal. Instead of feeling proud or even acknowledged, I'd be met with indifference and the constant reminder that I wasn't meeting his expectations. No matter how well I did, it was never enough, and it wasn't just schoolwork that earned his disapproval. Whenever I wanted to do anything outside of studying, whether it was playing sports or spending time with friends, he'd shoot it down without hesitation. His message was clear. The only thing that mattered was my studies, and I should focus on them so I could get out of his house as quickly as possible. Those words stung. They made me feel like more of a burden than a child who deserved love. My friends would talk about how their parents encouraged them to pursue their interests and enjoy life, but that was something I never got. I was constantly reminded that I wasn't really a part of his family. I was just a guest who had to follow his rules or else face being thrown out. Weekends, which should have been a time to relax and have fun with friends, weren't any different. If I ever asked to go out or hang out with friends, he'd go into a rant about how I was wasting his money. Even if I just wanted to spend time at a friend's house or go to the park, he'd launch into his usual lecture about how hard he was working to pay for my schooling and how I had no right to waste time or resources maintaining friendships. It was like anything that brought me even the smallest amount of happiness was automatically dismissed as unworthy or trivial by him. One of the most painful memories I have was how he reacted to my 15th birthday. While most kids look forward to their birthdays, planning parties or gatherings with friends, I dreaded mine every year. He didn't like celebrating my birthday, but that year I thought maybe things would be different and wanted to go to a movie with my friends and grab some pizza. But when I finally worked up the courage to ask him for money, he lost it. He screamed at me, telling me I had no right to celebrate my birthday because it was the same day my mom had passed away. He made it crystal clear that my birthday would always be the worst day of the year for him and that I shouldn't even think about enjoying it. So I never celebrated with my friends. Over time, all these repeated experiences taught me one painful truth. My dad hated me, and he didn't want me around, The constant rejection and criticism wore me down, making me feel like I was always walking on thin ice, trying not to do anything that would provoke his anger or disappointment. I gradually learned to keep my hopes and dreams to myself. I stopped expecting any form of approval or encouragement from him because I knew it would only lead to more disappointment and pain. Instead, I focused all my energy on excelling in my studies, doing whatever it took to escape my dad's house. In the end, all the effort, perseverance, and determination I put into my work paid off. I can still remember the moment I received my acceptance letter to a top university, along with a full scholarship. It felt like a wave of relief and pride washing over me. I was finally getting out. I was leaving my dad's oppressive grip behind and stepping into a new chapter where I could live on my own terms. Leaving home felt like the heaviest weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. The 4 years I spent in college turned out to be some of the best days of my life. It was a time of self-discovery, growth, and above all, joy. For once I could live like a normal young adult, doing all the things I'd longed to do, but never had the chance to experience before. My dad no longer had control over me, even though he tried to reach out and extend his influence from a distance. But by then, I had stopped listening to him. I had spent enough of my life under his thumb. And now it was time for me to make my own decisions, to carve out the life I wanted for myself. Despite all the freedom and fun college life offered, I didn't lose sight of my goals. I kept my grades up, determined to make the most of the opportunity one had worked so hard to earn. But I also allowed myself to enjoy life, to experience everything college had to offer. I went to parties, joined clubs, made new friends, and pursued hobbies that had once felt so far out of reach. Finally, I was living the life I had always dreamed of, and it was during this time that I met Lana. Meeting her was one of the most unexpected and wonderful things to happen to me in college. From the very start, there was something about Lana that drew me in. We were both ambitious, driven, and focused on building our careers. But what truly made our relationship special was the deep connection we had from the very beginning. Lana understood me in a way no one else had before. One of the things I love most about her is how we can sit together for hours, with no need to fill the silence. She lets me be lost in my thoughts, something rare in a relationship. With Lana, I never feel the pressure to be anyone other than myself. We enjoy each other's company, whether we're discussing our goals and dreams or just sitting side by side in comfortable silence. Lana was the first person who made me feel like I didn't have to carry the heavy weight of guilt I had been lugging around for years. She could see right through the pain I had grown so used to, the pain that had become such a constant part of my life that I didn't even realize how abnormal it was. Lana pointed out how wrong it was for my dad to blame me for my mom's death, and how no child should have to bear such a burden. She encouraged me to seek therapy, something I hadn't considered before. My dad's words had been so deeply ingrained in my mind that I didn't even realize there was a way to escape their influence. Going to therapy was one of the most transformative things I ever did at first. It wasn't easy to confront the reality of my upbringing, to face the trauma I'd lived with, and to challenge the toxic beliefs I had internalized. It took a lot of courage and even more effort. But therapy opened my eyes in ways nothing else had. It allowed me to see just how flawed my dad's thinking was, and more importantly, how much better I deserved. I began to understand that I wasn't responsible for my mom's death, and that my dad's anger and bitterness were his problems to work through, not mine. As I started to heal, I remember feeling my anger toward my dad grow stronger. It was as if all the resentment I had buried for so long was finally coming to the surface. I had spent years trying to earn his approval, trying to be the child he wanted, while silently carrying the weight of the guilt he had placed on me. But now, I was beginning to realize that none of it was my fault. He had unfairly and cruelly placed his grief and anger on me. This realization made it hard to maintain any kind of relationship with him during my college years. We barely spoke, and when we did, our conversations were brief and tense. I found myself snapping at him, bitterness seeping into my voice, with little patience for his attempts to control or criticize me. There came a moment when I finally confronted him about everything. It wasn't planned, but it all came spilling out in a rush of frustration and emotion. I told him about all the years he had blamed me for my mom's death, how his words and actions had deeply affected my mental health, and how I wasn't going to let him do that to me anymore. I made it clear that I was done being his scapegoat, and that I deserved respect and dignity, or I would cut him off from my life permanently. For once, he didn't say anything, He didn't apologize, which was what I had hoped for, but he also didn't deny what I said. After that conversation, I noticed a shift in how he treated me. He seemed to try to be gentler, less harsh when he spoke to me. It was as though he was trying to make an effort to change, to be more mindful of my feelings. But despite this, our relationship still felt strained. Years of pain and resentment couldn't just vanish with a few softer words. I appreciated the small change in his behavior, but the damage was done. It would take far more than that to fix what had been broken. If it could be fixed at all over time, even though our relationship with my dad remained sour, I no longer carried the same level of anger or guilt. I'd slowly come to terms with the fact that, while I couldn't change the past, I could control how it shaped my future. Of course, Lana's support played a huge part in this healing process. She helped me see that I deserved love, respect, and happiness. Recently, my dad married his girlfriend Tessa. It was a small, intimate wedding, and despite everything that had happened, I decided to attend with Lana. We went to show our support and wish them the best as they began this new chapter. I was happy for my dad, thinking that maybe his marriage would change him for the better, but only a month after the wedding, my dad called, his voice full of desperation. He had made some bad financial decisions and was struggling to make ends meet. He admitted he hadn't been able to pay his rent for 6 months, and now eviction was looming. He told me he couldn't tell Tessa because it would cause a fight between them. The first thing he asked was if I could cover his rent. Even though I had the means to do so, I immediately refused. I didn't want to be his financial safety net, especially after everything we had been through. I worked hard to build my life, and I didn't want to set a precedent where he could just turn to me every time something went wrong. But after talking with Lana, I started feeling guilty. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was being too harsh. After all, he was still my dad, and maybe he really did need help. So I called him back and offered a compromise. I told him that while I wasn't willing to pay his rent, I'd let him and Tessa stay with me temporarily. I had a house all to myself with plenty of space, and I told them they could stay with me until they got back on their feet and found a new place. It wasn't an easy decision considering everything that had happened between us, but I felt it was the right thing to do. I made it clear that this arrangement was temporary, and I expected him to actively work on getting back on his feet. After thinking it over, my dad called back and agreed. Within 2 weeks, he and Tessa moved in, and I set up a guest room for them. The first month was a period of adjustment for all of us. It had been years since I lived with my dad, and we were both completely different people now. I wasn't the teenager who had to silently endure his criticisms anymore. I was an adult with my own life, habits, and routines, but it didn't take long for his old patterns to reappear. He began commenting on my lifestyle and habits, as if nothing had changed. Whether it was the way I spent my time, how I kept the house, or how I managed my daily life, it seemed like he always had something to say. But I wasn't the same person anymore. This time, I wasn't willing to let him have that kind of power over me. Whenever he started criticizing or trying to control my life, I stood my ground and told him to stop. I made it clear that he had no right to comment on my choices, especially while living under my roof. I wasn't rude, but I was firm. I wasn't going to let him dictate how I lived my life. Not anymore, of course. This didn't sit well with his wife, Tessa. A couple of times, she made comments about how I needed to respect my dad. She'd say how much he'd sacrificed for me. I just shake my head because I knew the truth about him, and it was clear she didn't know half of what he'd put me through as a child. I did respect him, but I wasn't going to let him walk all over me or undermine my choices. I'd spent too much of my life trying to please him at the cost of my own happiness, and I wasn't about to fall back into that pattern. Still, it wasn't my place to tell Tessa the truth about him, so I just kept quiet whenever she made those remarks. It wasn't worth the argument. Living together was always going to be tough, but I hoped that with time, we could all find a way to coexist without too much friction. But then, one evening after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find my dad sitting in the living room, watching TV with Tessa. The house was a mess, and there were dishes piled up in the kitchen. I asked my dad why he hadn't cleaned up, especially after I'd told both him and Tessa multiple times that they needed to help out with the household duties, and it was his day to clean. He gave me that familiar tone that always set my teeth on edge. You were a grown-ass adult who I raised single-handedly after your mom passed. You should be ashamed for even asking me to do more work for you at this age. You can wash the dishes yourself. I was so furious hearing that. I shot back. You know what's really embarrassing? The fact that you're sitting here on my couch in my house, watching my TV, eating my food, and ordering me around when you're the one who begged me to let you move in for free. You and Tessa have done nothing to help me out this whole time. Guess what? If you don't feel like doing the dishes, you can pack your bags and leave. My dad just stared at me, clearly taken aback by how forceful I was. A tense silence fell, and for a moment, I thought he might actually get up and storm out. But I knew he had nowhere to go. So I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the kitchen door behind me, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and frustration. The next morning, I went downstairs and found myself alone in the kitchen with Tessa. My dad had probably left early for work. As I was about to leave, Tessa asked if we could talk. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect, but I agreed to sit down and listen. With a serious expression, Tessa began to tell me how hurt my dad was after our conversation the previous night. She said that I had no right to treat him that way, especially considering how much money he had supposedly spent to help me buy my house. Naturally, I was taken aback. My dad hadn't given me a dime of financial support since I left for college. I had bought this house with my own money I'd saved up over the years. The claim that he had contributed significantly to my house was completely unfounded. I asked Tessa to clarify what she meant, and she explained that my dad had told her he'd used some of his savings to help me buy it. It was like a light bulb went off, and I almost found it funny that this was the narrative my dad had fed her. Before I could say anything, Tessa kept pushing, insisting that I should be grateful for all the help my dad had supposedly given me. She said that, given his financial struggles, it was only fair for me to start paying rent to them while they stayed at my place, since, according to her, this was also my dad's house. Her argument was that, considering the financial sacrifices my dad had supposedly made, it was the least I could do. I stared at her, and I couldn't help it. I started laughing. The whole thing was so absurd I couldn't take it seriously. Once I finally stopped laughing, I told her the truth. I owned the house, and my dad hadn't paid for a dime. The look on her face was priceless. She had no idea, and it was clear that the shock and embarrassment hit her hard. She asked if it was really true that my dad had never helped me out, and I told her, he can't even pay his own rent. How could he afford to help me with my house? I guess after our conversation, she saw the truth too. She didn't argue much, but not long after, she packed up and left my place that same day. I didn't try to stop her. It wasn't my business. Later, when my dad came home, he called Tessa and asked why her things were gone. When he found out I'd told her the truth, he started blaming me. He accused me of making his wife uncomfortable and said I was sabotaging their relationship by revealing the truth. He said I should have kept my mouth shut and let her believe his lies, apparently. Now he felt small compared to me, like it was my fault he couldn't afford a place of his own. It was frustrating beyond belief. I reminded him that here I was offering my home to help them out, and instead of gratitude, I was being blamed for their issues. My dad seemed to forget that I didn't owe him anything, and the only person responsible for his situation was him. It was like all those years of him treating me as if I was the problem had come rushing back. Now, even as an adult, he was trying to make me the scapegoat for something that wasn't my fault, but he wouldn't listen. Instead of seeing my perspective, he insisted I call Tessa and apologize, clearing things up by lying and letting her think he had helped with the purchase of the house. I told him I wasn't going to lie for him to his wife. I was exhausted from the manipulation and blame. I had reached my limit. Finally, I told him I couldn't handle having him around anymore. His constant fighting with me was starting to affect my mental health. I asked him to pack his things and move out by the next day. It was a hard decision, but I needed to establish boundaries and protect my peace. He argued that he didn't have anywhere to go and begged for more time. But at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care about his excuses or his situation anymore. I stuck to my decision, and the next morning, I made him move out. Ever since, he's been reaching out to me, complaining about how I ruined his life and his marriage because Tessa won't talk to him. He keeps blaming me for everything, saying a good son would never have kicked his parents out. As for me, I'm glad that people understand the trauma my dad has put me through over the years. A lot of people have suggested that I reach out to Tessa and share the truth about my childhood, since she might not fully understand who my dad really is up until now. I prefer to stay out of his business, but I feel it's important for her to know the reality. He's probably lied to her about a lot of things, and I think it's time she knows the truth, so I plan to contact her and have a one-on-one conversation. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update, and I finally had the chance to sit down with Tessa and talk things through. Turns out, she had no idea about the kind of childhood I had. I shared the emotional trauma and blame I endured, and she seemed genuinely shocked. She admitted that my dad had painted a completely different picture, portraying himself as a struggling single father who sacrificed everything for his child. I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief. I told her stories about my childhood, how I was constantly blamed for my mom's death, and how that shaped my life. She listened, expressed sympathy, and seemed to understand. I then explained how hard I worked through college to establish myself, how lucky I was to land a good job, and how that allowed me to save enough to buy my own house. This, I told her, is why I don't like my dad dictating things in my house. Because when I lived with him, I wasn't allowed to be myself. Tessa understood. Then, she told me something that hit me hard. She revealed that my dad had lost all his money due to gambling, something he never told me. She hadn't mentioned it before because he was ashamed and wanted to keep it hidden when my dad first suggested moving in with me. Tessa had refused, uncomfortable with the idea. I guess that's when my dad lied to her about contributing to my house, which made her feel less guilty about accepting the offer to stay with me. When she found out from me that his claims were all lies, she felt devastated. She admitted how embarrassed she was about asking me for rent. I reassured her that it wasn't her fault, that the blame lay entirely with my dad and his manipulative tactics. As we were parting ways, Tessa mentioned that after our talk, she was planning to take some time away from my dad to reflect on their relationship. Update 3. Hi everyone, I know it's been 3 months since my last update. I've completely cut my dad out of my life since I asked him to move out. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary for my mental and emotional well-being. The last time we spoke, he tried to blame me for everything again, but I didn't engage. I simply blocked him and moved on. Since then, I have to admit, I've felt so much better. The stress and manipulation have lifted, and I'm feeling a sense of relief and clarity. It's like I've finally gotten my space and peace of mind back. My girlfriend, Lana, has been an incredible source of support throughout this process. She's been there for me every step of the way, offering comfort, encouragement, and helping me work through all the emotions. I'm really grateful for her. With my dad out of the picture and Lana by my side, I'm slowly finding a new sense of stability and happiness. I'm focusing on building the life I want, chasing my goals, and enjoying the positive aspects of my relationship.